are running. Let's start our magic light bulb. Welcome to Evolution Hour. On today, the 18th, 2026, in our ongoing year of catastrophe and doom and uncertainty and angst, yippity skippity. And of course, the obligatory mention of the website. There we go. Button there. Old person, tired. Whoops, connection lost, reconnecting. Wait a minute. Okay, I think we're back on screen. Alrighty. Yikes. Bumpy start. What can I say? Anyway, this is a Luskin week, so we'll be having a few more sources, including a Theodicy one that's really cute. And of course, we are continuing the ongoing analysis of 1995 Dwayne Gish versus 1978 Dwayne Gish. Evolution, the fossils say no or still say no. Back in the ancient print days, much more widely referenced than today in the internet era, where Gish is sliding gradually into kind of obscurity in the field, as the people who would be paying attention to him have kind of faded away as well, because they're probably as great as I am. So interesting. Anyway, we're in a little zone in the 1995 version of Gish where he's sprinkling some newer material in. And it's a sprinkle of stuff from the intelligent design movement that's coming in. Maybe he was mentioned before. And a source that in 1995 was more recent. It was only just a few years old. A book by Soren Lovtrup from 1987, Darwinism, the Refutation of a Myth, which the kind of European, Lamarckian, macroevolutionary qualms about standard neo-Darwinian theory that was going on in the United States. And he was grumpy cat about Darwinian material, and Gish is just happy to allude to him. And Lovtrup stuff pops up occasionally now and then. He was certainly not a creationist. He was an evolutionist, not a minor league biologist either. And so he was taken really fairly seriously as a grumpy cat back in 1987. Reviews, even one at Evolution Journal, putting a link to the quarterly review of biology, another abstract, first pages for each one of those. Certainly was deferring to him as somebody that needed to be listened to. Now, looking at it from 2026, it's a tempest in a teapot, because the Lovetrup's view of things went absolutely nowhere, whereas the mutation selection, natural evolution, natural mutation dynamics of biology, and particularly what was about to be hitting in the way of Evo Devo and homeobox genes and all of that stuff, meant that all of the debate that were fighting words back in the 1980s are irrelevant to 21st century kids. So it's kind of interesting misfire. Quoter that Gish has dropped this point is Tom Bethell, who comes from the intelligent design branch and is particularly flimsy. American Spectator, a conservative magazine. He was dealing with, there's no full link to the text, so I'm not going to bother about it. But we alluded to him in our work a lot. Both Evolution Slam Dunk and Rocks were there. Well, not a huge amount, but I mean, he pops up in that he's also a relativity denier. And so he didn't like that Einstein guy. And that puts him off in the little cloud cuckoo land peripheral area. And Bethel also pops up in relation to how he was taking Scott Hughes's creationist book way too seriously than he should have. So it's nothing great shakes about all of that. The Luskin list that we're hitting today, no surprise, there's no smoking guns. 3 sources, a couple of which were coming from people that we've already seen their group, their name pop up in previous weeks. There's a Daniel et al. 15, a second one from them from 2015, because we had dealt with the previous one. Unfortunately, I only got the extended abstract, the link to for that one, but the Science Direct is fairly detailed in their secondary abstract structures, which was just repeating the kinds of things we've already known, that inverted ALU repeats are playing a role in hotspots, la-di-da. And then there's one from Tajad et al. 2016, another 2016 paper from them, that we will be putting the full link on. And again, this is just reinforcing material from the other papers that they've done. The third paper is a much more fun one, Gelfand et al. 2015, because this one slams full out into theodicy, as it is explicitly how eye degeneration builds off of toxic iron impact, and that's directly connected to how it exploits the ALU connections. So are you looking at a designer deliberately designing ALUs to be in a position to be able to cause eye degeneration? Yeah, it sounds kind of creepy. And whether or not poor Luskin or whoever put it on their list was paying much attention to this, because it was quite obvious from the title, and as well definitely from the abstract, that that's what it was about. So this is a thing to put on their list. Do this. As it happens, my co-author Jackson had just done a dandy little sum of sign versus lines, and including some mention of ALUs in his very latest video. There's a section in there about how those things replicate and organize and modulate in the genome. So I'm going to be putting a link to his new video on the subject, so you can take a look at that, because Jackson does it in delicious detail and with graphics, unlike the clunky thing that you're seeing here, which is just my mug sticking up. And I'll move on then to the progress report of where we are on Rocks Were There. Just finishing up the Paleo World section. I'm just sliding in all the cute material on brains from my Pacific Northwest here. Nick Zentner's lectures from Central Washington University have been just absolutely gold mine. And I'm only going to be sampling a little teeny tip of the iceberg relative to what's going on, because the salient points is that Pacific Northwest geology and North American geology in general, but certainly here in up to Canada, is immensely complicated in terms of bits and pieces, ancient landscapes that were oriented differently. That, for all practical purposes, creationists pay no attention to that whatsoever. They only glance peripherally into some of these little issues. And in the most recent case from, I keep on getting a little flasher here. I'm not sure whether I'm still online, but the counter seems to be running. Yeah. Little bits from the Tim Clary set and all that crowd, Michael Ord and that group, of where they're barely glancing into the stuff. Ord pops into it relating to the Baja BC thing. I'll put that little blip up in here. It's a term you may or may not ever heard of. Baja BC. Baja and BC or British Columbia, because it is generally regarded that there's a discordance between paleomagnetic data and other geological data that relates to a chunk of real estate that looks like it might have not been as far north when it was formed as it is now. And although there's a considerable concern and debate about whether it's taking into a proper account the paleomagnetism is about orientation and when and the latitude it was in, there is still a small cadre of people who are Baja BC advocates, and Nick Zentner covers it quite a bit. He's sympathetic to the idea. There's various around the issue, but it reminds us about the notion that it's interesting if creation is a little side issue, because they're a slam dunk of geological material, Wrangellia in Silesia, and the resurrection plate, and the issue of how big the Farallon plate was and what angles things are coming in, and material that relates to the old red sandstone back in the Devonian that's sprinkled around in North America, that is just inexplicable from anything that isn't relating to an extremely long-term geological frame, because you just can't speed these things up. Virtually all of the stuff is bumping into the post-flood frame because it's a post-Cretaceous, an awful lot of this stuff, although some of the terrain that involved, and that's terrain spelled a little differently. It's Terrane in the geological biz. And Ord and others that we'll be discussing in the new book, really giving this short shrift and not even closely reading the sources that they deal with. And in the case of other ones discussing North Cascades, they don't even bother citing any source citations at all on it, technical papers. So for all practical purposes, the Pacific Northwest arises in creationist literature only in relation to the Missoula floods, occasionally in relation to the Columbia basalts, and then, of course, Mount St. Helens, which is a trope that's there all the time. Move over into intelligent design land, and they don't pay any attention to that at all. Same thing for old Earth creationists. So they're just not bothered what's going on in there. So it's a useful archetype to characterize just how useless creationism is, in the fact that they're keen, and worse, they are connecting. Still counters running. That there's no sense in which they work out what the hell the geography of the pre-flood world looked like, other than to crib either Rodinia supercontinent or Pangaea supercontinent, depending upon whether or not you're at ICR or AIG or elsewhere. And so these superficial elements to where they've never been able to work out what the flood world looked like in terms of geography in anything like even a rudimentary cartoon level. That's as best as a few of them can do. And compared to the meticulous fault line markings and all the rest that pop up in actual geological literature, they're 8,000 miles behind the curve, and there's no way they're going to catch up. Particularly because the thing that we'll also be alluding to in the new book is how deep mantle seismic tomography has advanced in just the last decade, to where they can model in great detail what the little squiggly bits of subduction plates look like when they get all scrunched up down inside the earth. And therefore, they're able to detect these things. One under the New York at the moment. There's one that they've done underneath New Zealand. And they'll be gradually exploring other areas that are pieces that, when they were unsquiggled on the surface, was 100, 200, 300 million years ago. And so they're able to find the fossil remnants of a lot of these plate movements, which can be wound backwards to give at least rough guides about much earlier continental plate movements compared to the kind of stuff that was being done 20, 30 years ago. So that's another area where, boy, the creationists are just getting farther and farther behind the curve. And it's part of the final material that we'll be putting into the new chapter. Then I get to go on to plug in the stuff from Jackson on the cosmology chapter, and adding some slight brand new material. Brand new paper just came out in, I think, Nature about the after the Big Bang. That's metal poor, fancy way of saying it's a bunch of early generation population 3 stars. And that's yet another confirmation that the JWST, far from being a problem for standard cosmology, as Jason Lyle and a few of these people were putting, nope, sorry, that's not how things are turning out. And the scientific literature just keeps piling up. So we can expect to see over years more goalposts moving. And the cosmology chapter covers an awful lot of creationist goalpost moving, or little camps of people that are sniping their own things, resolve the distance sight problem, which remains a perennial difficulty for all of them. And then, of course, move over to the design side and the old Earth creationist side, and they just don't think about it. So all of that's going to be covered in delicious detail. Then Once I get through plugging that material in, then it's on to the Ark Encounter chapter, where we'll be giving a master listing for the first time of all the kinds in the Ark Encounter, which is the basement level. No other creationist group has tried to go whole hog to restrict themselves to family level, with the exception of us, which would be a good way to keep the number of kinds down to that way low 1,500 kind list that theoretically they could pack the things onto the Ark. Yeah, there's problematic elements in that too. But they have, it's not merely how tendentious that part is and to the extent to which they're leaving some families out, terrestrial organism families, but how superficial and parasitical their discussion is. That it's painfully obvious that they're just riffing off of standard evolutionary systematics when they're compiling their list, to the point of that's why their list isn't in alphabetical order, it's in evolutionary order. So, and especially for mammals. So all of that's going to be documented. So with anybody that wants to dive into how the Ark Encounter structures things, will be able to see their examples in a clear-cut way, in a way that you can't at their own website. They don't list off their material. They don't have detailed charts for any of this stuff. So they're not exactly going out of their way to make it easier to track all this stuff down. And it's only because gradually there's some people, including Erica Gutsick-Gibbon, who were able to do high-resolution photographs of their chart of kinds aboard the Ark to be able to piece together what the hell's on it. And now that we have that, we can go with it. So that's going to be one of the little scoops in Rocks Were There. And then it'll be a matter of finding out how tiny do I have to make the font for the reference bibliography to plug everything all in there. Oh, hi there, Night Air. Creationists know they don't have to bother with things like having a working model or use proper taxonomical terms. Oh, they're very careful about some of the terminology they use, though. As anybody that follows, particularly young Earth creationism, it's not really a thing with intelligent design. They're perfectly happy to use the standard terminology because they don't go very deep on it. But creationists are very, very fond of using obsolete or proprietary terms. The very term polystrate fossil for a thing that is not the way it's described in regular scientific literature. So if anybody decides to track it down and they Google polystrate fossils, they're going to get creationist literature popping up on the top, not regular scientific material. Even in this matter of exotic terrains, Michael Ord is using obsolete term for it rather than using the modern terminology. That's, I suspect, to some extent by design, in order to channel the reader onto their creationist apologetics. That sort of stuff, of course, is only coming up in a young Earth creationist apologetics, because old Earth creationists don't give a rat's ass about the geological context of the Earth. The only time they kind of get involved is to dragoon the Big Bang into matters. And I watched that debate that Steve Meyer had with Phil Halper recently on fine-tuning and basically origins or bust issues and all of that. And it was very useful in seeing just how not moving from the data field that he thinks he understands Meyer was. And Halper, I think, did a fairly good job in countering that the current cosmological views and things are much more nuanced and much more complex than the kind of authority quote mode that Meyer is in on it. As well as there's a brand new poll that was done, a bunch of physicists that Halper was reporting on, that was reinforcing what the professional scientists think about these things, and that issues on whether or not the Big Bang is a beginning of the universe or just the beginning of the hot, dense state, and whether or not that means much to think about what happened before any of that. It's fun. Yes, keep scientifically illiterate Christians in the fold. They know science-savvy people will never believe them. Yeah, well, and that they're acolytes. They must be aware that their groups are not exactly jumping on the bit to fact-check stuff. Or if they do, their fact-checking, their do-your-own research kind of thing, is simply reading reinforcing material from the apologetic websites that say the things they want to be true. And that goes without saying. It's a trope that occurs in other areas other than young Earth creationism. If you look at, Graham Hancock and his pseudo-archaeology crowd, if you look at Holocaust deniers, if you look at flat earthers, and people who don't think we landed on the moon, or any niche silly belief, and all the way up to anti-vaxxers and others that have much more serious difficulties with impacting actual people's lives. They're all using exactly the same bad method. There's an enormous repetition of tropes, a relative reluctance to investigate their own source material. The techno-geeky people among them will be giving sources for things. You can find, Merkela, that anti-vaxxer that pops up on Epoch Times, would have often dozens of linked sources. But the question is, how many of their people will go to look? And I know from direct experience that when you start looking, you find frequently that the papers don't indicate what they think they do. And so they're misrepresenting the source material or restricting their material to friendly sources that say the things they always want to be true, or sometimes extremely dated material that is obsolete, but they're not going to tell their people about it. So it's the same bad method, one bad method to rule them all. It's a fun little thing to deal with. And of course, now that we're blundering through the bad effects of giving Trump the car keys again, to where they're corrupt and doing slush funds and getting played by the Chinese and having us embroiled in a mess in Iran that Trump is not going to be able to figure a way out of. And it's going to be an interesting spring, summer, autumn as we slide into the midterms and find out whether we can still have legitimate midterms and whether or not any of the gerrymandering things that have been given functionally a green light by our corrupt Roberts Trumpista court, whether we can maneuver around that sufficiently, because ironically, ungerrymandering things so that they can do it so that white Republicans can have a better chance. Well, they may actually just simply make it easier to elect white Democrats in this department as we blunder along into the economy. It's a sign, maybe a positive, that the economy has shown itself resilient, that it hasn't fallen apart. And is it possible that all of that effort of 80 years has made an economy that is functionally depression-proof? Well, we know it could get serious recession, as it happened in 2008. So I am not entirely convinced that we can't have some major fall aparts. And I'm still thinking we're hovering around 1929. So we will be seeing what happens farther down the road when more numbers are starting to crunch and people are tightening their belt and they find they don't have a belt left to tighten, and companies doing exactly the same thing. And then the rippling shocks of all of these things from the Iranian war and the tariffs and all these other things, plus whether or not NVIDIA fails to make a quarterly growth sign, that would be an indication that a lot of the AI bubble is about ready to go kapoof. And on top of which, you have all of the hidden banking system that's going on, that's operating at, looks like it's operating at levels that are comparable to what was going on in the housing bubble of 2008. So interesting times for us all, and we're going to see what's going to be happening in this front. The outcome, if there's a positive one from all of this, will be really serious switches in the political parties. Way more progressives need to be elected. You need to have enough to be able to pass really serious antitrust legislation to break up big media companies and correct our healthcare problems and the housing affordability issues. None of that's going to come from the Republicans. They are merely Trumpista toadies to the God King Emperor, and that's not going to work out any of that. So anyway, there's a little bit of soapbox on the time. Let me put up my thank you note for our patrons. Move my little mouse here to get to my menu. The neat thing that I'm always delighted with being able to do this research in this time is that the level of material that is directly available to fact check things, as we've said, thank you all our patrons, colleagues, researchers, assistant researchers, friends, legacy patrons. It's tough times for everybody concerned, but everybody that's been able to stick with it, the old RJ, I am hyper appreciative, and thank you. We most with what we have, and bearing in mind that everybody has to make do with the things that they have available. I remind everybody that we live in a veritable golden age of information retrieval and accessibility. It's on a scale that is just mind-boggling. And there's my picture back. That when I think about research 25 years ago, that the kind of analyses that needs to be done for things like this would have been utterly impossible. And not coming from Democrats either. They spent millions to progress these. Oh, yes. And you've got a serious issue of where circumstances have changed a lot. That the kinds of political perspectives on what traditional middle-of-the-roady kind of Democrats were, in a depression economy, you can have an awful lot changing. Certainly all the polling indicates that young people, the Gen Z and beyond, that are just coming onto the voting field, have an openness to, air quotes, socialist, broader hyper-progressive policies than has been the case in decades. And the fact that you have a socialist mayor in New York City, and you've got Democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders pulling big crowds and all the rest, are indicating that there's an awful lot of fundamental questions that need to be asked about things. And the fact that we've been running for the last 25 years off a tax policy that has just been greasing the skids for privileged oligarch, rich, lawyered up people who are now in the Trump administration, and they don't want to give up power. They want to keep the gravy train going, and they're the ones on the train. But it's not at all improbable that over the next months, that K-shaped economy that we have, where rich people have doing beautifully and everybody else is starting to get antsy. Well, the bottom end of that K, where it meets the main line, that lower echelon of people who have done really well under the gravy train, may find that that's stopped as all of the economic problems start rippling up through the economy. And eventually you're just going to have that little privileged, bunkered upper level of the K that have way too much higher percentage of the wealth of the country. Things are going to have to be done about it. And nothing spurs that on like bad economic conditions. So we will see what kind of things happen in that regard. Let's put our little advert up for Rocks For There Volume 1. Waiting for my little steam-powered computer here to get the file up. There we go. Come on. And then share screen going. And again, I will urge everybody who is reasonably expert in any particular topic that woo purveyors are bumping into, for heaven's sakes, take up the cudgel, explore the expertise. At the very least, you can start doing videos like I do. Make sure always to have sources so people don't have to take your word for it, and thereby encourage people at every opportunity to use source methods in how they approach things. And that this needs to be done not merely on scientific issues and cultural issues, but political issues. And until and unless you have a much higher percentage of people who move beyond bad fact-checking in the sense that they don't really fact-check at all, to real serious source methods where they are really paying attention to primary source material, we're going to be in this mess way too much. And it's not as though people can't do it. It's certainly tools aren't available for everybody to do it. I know this because I do it every single week, following up on all the material and all the books that Jackson and I have written, and the source material. We know by direct inspection exactly how accessible material is and how you can burrow down through things. And everybody who I know who has become a full source methods person, whether it's Apologia going after biblical apologetics, or Erica analyzing hominid evolution, or Dan Stern-Cardinale and Zach Hancock going into the exciting world of genetics and biology, or Dapper Dino waxing on paleontology and all these other topics. Every single one of them, there is accessibility and there is a data field that is knowable. We live in an age of knowable. And so what the hell excuse can somebody have for not being able to acquire the information and to build off of it? And we need to get more people doing that. First of all, it's interesting, it's fun. Reality is so much more interesting than fiction, even though I do fictional books. The Paralog site, oops, higher up, that's over there above my CD cabinet. There they are, way up on the ceiling. Whoop. Once we get Rocks Are There Volume 2 out of the way, I can get my brain back to Paralogs 3 and get that one out of the way. And then there will only be 9 more to go. La-di-da. Everybody stay uber safe. Watch out for finances. Make sure your powder's dry. Watch out for any interactions where, especially now that we're entering in the election season, know your candidates at all, everything all the way down to who's managing boards. That's just as important. Anything, insurance commissioners and all the various levels, state and local and federal, because literally our lives and the future of our nation and all the people living in it and the long-term viability of the planet are all contingent upon what individual voters are doing every single bloody time. And any complacency people have, well, it's only a midterms. No, sorry, get off the duff. Can't do that anymore. You're going to have to get going and get on the bandwagon of participation, because I don't want to live long enough to see a future that we really regret having made. I want to see one where I'm going, oh, I wish I could be living longer, but at least I'm confident that we're going to be moving closer towards a Star Trek world rather than a dystopian Dune world. So anyway, there's the little soapbox. Next week, we'll have continuing material on Gish, probably in another this week and next. We should be finishing off that initial chapter. And then we're getting into the supposed technical stuff to where we can plow through all of that. I know that just from my old looking at the Gish 95 stuff and what I knew from what he did before, that will be, we got to go way down into the dinosaurs to start finding some of the newer material. And even then it was extremely superficial. I'd covered a bit of that in the old tip work on creationism, the tip 3 Dynamania that has chunks on Gish. But coming at this 20 years later, I have so much more access to material. And even though some of the really older crap that Gish is playing around with aren't necessarily available open access, sometimes we are surprised, like we were being able to see that Newsweek thing that was archived at archive.org that would have been unavailable in previous times. So we will be enjoying this together. Every week we will be seeing exactly how source methods is done, tracking down material, evaluating context, finding out if there's new material on a subject, and always with the principle that you don't have to take my word for it. Source methods means you provide sources so that other people can follow up on it, and away you go. That's how it works, and we need to do that on everything. There is no exception. There is no area of human inquiry or action where sound source methods will not benefit your understanding and therefore make you a better citizen and a better intellect, period. No exceptions. So anyway, there it is. Everybody stay super safe. Watch out for the laser-wielding penguins from Antarctica. And we will be seeing you all next week with another installment of the wonderful world of evasive Dwayne Gish.